Good morning, everyone. For some of you, this is deja vu all over again, but our internet died after 1 minute, so we're going to pretend that we never started. We're going to start again. We are continuing with our wonderful discussion of Swami's writing, A New Dispensation, and let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence, Swamiji, behind your words, that the divine vision that inspired you to write in this way be transferred directly and wholly into our hearts and spirits, that we may walk with you with full understanding and complete commitment to the vision of freedom, of joy, of love that inspired and guided you. May we be inspired and guided by the same ray of the divine. Om, peace. Amen. Are we still on? Okay. All right. Our text seems to be working, so we're going to plow happily forward. When Swamiji wrote this pamphlet, which was in the 1980s, he was extremely enthusiastic about it, and I admit that I was too. But as I read it now, what is now not quite 30 years afterwards, I realize I really just didn't quite understand what it was that he was so thrilled about. And I'm not quite sure that I can, excuse me, I have to clear my throat. And I'm not sure I can exactly convey to you what's changed. Because I've always known that there was a ray of grace and divine grace was carrying us. But I think the older I get, the more my sense of awe increases rather than the opposite. I think having lived more years on the spiritual path, been through more ups and downs, watched and helped, walked with many more people going through all those ups and downs, there's just this gradual comprehension, well, almost exactly the words that Swami used, that, there's a ray of grace that protects the devotee. And most of the time, or much of the time, we're talking about actually being protected from outright tragedy, as Master called it. But it's more a feeling of not being alone, that despite the appearance of our separateness, that just as the Masters promised, there's this legion of angels that's walking with us. Perhaps as years pass, the veil between the two worlds thins a little bit on some intuitive level. But whatever it is, I renew my gratitude day after day to Swamiji for leaving behind such explicit and powerful revelations that he was able to put into words. And the words themselves are not the revelation, but they seem to have the power to spark within us a glimpse of the revelation itself. So now we're talking about a very simple aspect of it. All members of this family of self-realization reflect in their lives qualities which are particular to this special ray of divine grace. So we've talked so far about kindness and joy yesterday. Now he speaks of openness, trust, and a certain inner radiance. Openness is a very interesting, because that's the first one he talks about. It's a very, again, the characteristics of the way Swamiji lived as a devotee, how he inspired the members of Ananda, how Jyotish and Devi, Jyotish as his successor, and the two of them as Master's representatives worldwide for Ananda. The way they are, we take it for granted that this is just the way to be. But Swamiji steps back a moment and really looks at it as uniquely self-realization and uniquely Ananda characteristics. The word openness is a really interesting one. It's very common when people are deeply committed to a spiritual path that they're not really that open. They're not able to be that open. That there's a necessity to protect, to a certain extent, whatever it is that one is doing. And in the path of Ananda, also, there are many times where one has to be protective. You just can't expose yourself to too many points of view. Now, you have to understand also that we are settled, devotees of Master through Ananda, we are settled in our path. We're not still shopping. We don't have to go check out every new technique, every new reputed to be guru, every new messenger of Babaji. We don't have to always be saying, oh, there must be more, there must be more. It's very much, in fact, it's exactly like making a marriage commitment. It doesn't mean that attractive individuals don't still exist in the world, people with fine qualities. It's just that I'm committed now. I have my path, I have my way, and my expansion comes from going ever deeper into the commitment I've made. It doesn't come from gathering up new opportunities and new possibilities. But openness, it exists on multiple levels. I think the primary thing that I would say is always open to hear God speaking, always open to inspiration, always open to a new, more creative, deeper, more enlightened way, even to go about the same things that we're doing all the time. Instead of just, I have my ways and I'm just going to do it, this is the pattern I follow, this is what I was told. We're always willing to have that commitment be freshened by new ideas and interests. Just yesterday, I was speaking to Dharma Das and Nirmala, who are longtime friends on the spiritual path, and I was just talking about some experiences that I've had, and that I've observed in others, and I was talking about the question of grief, and I was mentioning how confusing it is to me. It just has always been confusing that one can have an experience that strains the heart, or that breaks the heart. And it's a certainty that after a certain amount of time passes, one's relationship to that grief will be different. Now, let's even say that we actually are transcending that grief, that it's not just that we've succeeded in suppressing it. It's just our relationship to it will be different. And knowing that our relationship will be different in time, why can't it be different right now? This is just a conundrum that's been in my head. Well, Dharma Das commented that, well, it's true, of course, in principle that, if we could put out as much energy in the balancing side, the grief could be dissolved in just a moment. It could just be made to go away if we put enough energy into resolving, releasing. But he raised the interesting issue that it's not just it's the fact that we're not able, that I am not able, and most people I know are not able to do that in the moment. He said it's perhaps because the nervous system can't handle all that much energy all at one time. And then we talked about Dr. Lewis pressing Master. He wanted an experience of samadhi, and he kept trying to press Master to give him that experience. I believe it was Dr. Lewis. And finally, Master said to him, if I gave it to you right now, could you take it? And then looked at him with all the energy that's involved in shifting from ordinary into cosmic consciousness. Now, Dr. Lewis, if it was he, was a very advanced soul. But still, in the face of that much energy, he had to say, no, sir, I couldn't. And that's why God doesn't give you the experience. Even though you shake your fist, we're not ready. It's an interesting fact that Swamiji Master point out, that Catholic saints who became very, very great spiritually, who did not have yoga practice, and most of them did not have yoga practice. So they increased the amount of divine energy flowing through by the sheer power of willpower and devotion, but as a consequence, they often suffered enormously physically. Saint Teresa of Avila had extraordinarily dramatic incidences of blindness and illness and paralysis as she sort of went through her sadhana, because she didn't know how to work with the energy the way yoga practice tells us. She arrived at the same goal, but at great cost to her physical body. So again, we're talking about how the energy flows and what it does to us. Yoga, as Master said, prepares and purifies the body as you go along. So yogis can elevate to very high states without ever having to go through that kind of physical chaos as the energy increases. Well, isn't that an interesting idea? And all of a sudden it made perfect sense to me. It isn't just a question of being able to generate the energy, but Divine Mother keeps us from being able to generate the energy. It's just that we couldn't handle it. We couldn't solve our grief instantaneously because the energy required to do that wouldn't serve our nervous system. So it's an entirely new idea to me. It's a question I've been asking for years and years, decades. I've been wondering, just trying to understand how time plays into it. Is it absolutely the final answer? I really don't know. But it just opens up. It opens up the possibility of something new. And rather, it is a new aspect of the teachings that I already know. But it's having that humility and that enthusiasm and that curiosity for life that rather than just causes us to be set in our ways and these are the practices. I have to say, and Swami I think remarked about this earlier, I'm not sure now whether it was in this book or it was in a different book I'm working with, my class based on his letters, Divine Friendship. He talked about how in Europe, especially in Assisi or Rome, where you see a great many of traditional Catholic clergy, he says how rare it is to see one of these men or women who have devoted themselves to the monastic life, how rare it is to see one that's actually shining with divine light. Mostly, they just look, well, they've lived their whole lives this way, and that's to be respected. But you don't see this radiance, which is what he calls also one of these qualities. You don't see it very often, and when you do, it's very notable. Swami said it makes him very sad. He was writing about this in the context of that kind of monastic life, maybe for Kali Yuga and not for Dwapara Yuga. We're moving into a different reality, and those monasteries are emptying, not for lack of spiritual determination on the part of the devotees, but from an intuitive realization that that lifestyle is not the way to express it. Interestingly, the visionaries of Medjugorje and of Medjugorje most notably, instead it always would have been in the past, Mary told them to enter monastic orders. In this case, they all, I believe, married and have had families at Mary's instruction. That here they are, they're visionaries of Divine Mother, and she sends them out to just live in the world, more or less, and I mean less, not really ordinary, but nonetheless to just adopt that lifestyle. Times are very changing. But the openness, always to learn something new, always to have a new experience, to meet a new friend, that openness is profoundly balanced by loyalty and commitment to one path. That openness is not an eclectic shopping or a mixing of ways or a constant, maybe something's better than what I have. One of the reasons that Ananda devotees can be so open is because we are so settled in our path. And therefore there's no dilution. And we can just appreciate. We can appreciate beauty and devotion where we find it without it in any way undermining our essential way of being. So we're open to people, and we're open to experiences within the realm of the life that we live. But it is a notable quality. Ananda, people listen. We're not always just trying to talk. Would just tell me about that. It's always fascinating to me when I'm with someone who just has an experience that I know nothing about. Tell me about that. Tell me what it is to be an African in a mixed race marriage in America. Tell me what it is to be 14 years old and having to face these kinds of issues that I never even considered having to face. Tell me what it's like to be addicted to alcohol. What does that feel like? These are not things that I know, but I want to know. I want to hear about it. I want to feel what that consciousness is, in the hope that learning will make me more helpful to God, more helpful to others as God's instrument. And it's a definite characteristic of Ananda people that we're open and we listen. And we remain firm in our commitment, but we allow our openness to enrich our commitment rather than to diminish it. So after openness comes the word trust. Now, trust is a really marvelous word, and it's a very, very big word to contemplate. There are two really important rules in guidelines for the success of Ananda, and one of them is where there is Dharma, there is victory, and the other is be practical in your idealism. We don't always say be practical in your idealism when we're listing Ananda's guidelines, but we ought to, because it's also an absolutely defining characteristic of Ananda and one of the reasons why it's been so successful. So in the concept of trust, where there is Dharma, it plays a really big role in that. Where there is Dharma, there is victory means quite simply, if we follow the right path as we divinely understand it, everything will work out as it's meant to work out. And it will often work out in a harmonious, positive way. But our trust in that truth is not based on that I'm going to get my will, my preference, my opinions. It's based on, if I am not loyal to Dharma, I have nothing anyway. And that I trust, if I stay with my principles, that righteousness will triumph in the end. I mean, I was very touched, and some of you may have heard this. Somebody sent me a video about Tibetan monks. I was very interested in it. And when it's hard to talk about Tibetan monks without talking about, I don't know, do they call it genocide? It's certainly genocide of a culture. The complete eradication over the last 50 years of the traditional Tibetan culture. And I still see banners that say Save Tibet, but there's a landmass to save, but the culture has been obliterated. And the Dalai Lama was speaking, and he was talking to one of the, because one of the things that happened to the monks and to the nuns is that they were arrested, imprisoned, and treated brutally by the Chinese. The word has to be said out loud. The Chinese came in and they reclaimed the land, and they removed that culture, and they forcibly removed the guardians of that culture, which were the monks and nuns. So this man, this Tibetan monk, had been in prison, I believe, for quite a number of years, a decade or more, was finally released and made it to Dharamsala, to India, where the Tibetan have their refugee center. It's basically where they have their culture now. And the Dalai Lama was talking to this monk, and he was asking the monk about his time in prison. And the monk said it was very, very dangerous. It was an extremely dangerous time. And the Dalai Lama said, were you afraid for your life every day? Oh, no, he said. He said, the tremendous danger was that I would lose compassion for the prison guards. And he said that was the constant danger that he faced all those years. is that his heart would close against those who were torturing him and imprisoning him, because that wouldn't have been Dharma. Where there is Dharma, there is victory. And the monk knew his life could end at any moment. There's a tremendous number of practices in Tibetan yoga for transcending all physical limitations. The Tibetan monks are famous for going out in their cotton cloths and sitting in the snow in sub-freezing weather and melting the snow around them because of the heat they generate from their bodies. By no means am I saying that every monk or nun who was tortured was able to transcend it physically. But the monk knew that it was a test. It was a test of his trust in God. And if he could remain loyal to his principles, which is compassion for all, the divine is present in everyone, kindness to all creatures, never judge, trust that God is in charge. And if he's put me subject to this evil person, that evil person is God's responsibility, not mine. My only responsibility is to keep my heart open and to trust God. And it was a very dangerous situation. It would be dangerous for any of us that we would lose our capacity to hold to Dharma and that we would lose our trust in God's mercy and in God's wisdom. Does he really know what he's doing in putting me here? I'm not presumptuous on this. I think about being put in those circumstances myself, past life memory or just a sort of imaginary effort to test myself against circumstances even if I'm not in them. But to trust God at all times, and to trust that if I follow Dharma, the right thing will happen. Swamiji set an unwavering example of that. Yesterday when I was talking about kindness, I gave the opposite example when Swami acted very sternly, when he discovered that an individual who had responsibility for money and people was not living up to his responsibilities and was misusing those, and what was happening was not Dharma. Within a matter of hours, Swami absolutely just closed the department. That was that. And that was the end of it. There was no looking back. There was no, well, maybe we could make this work. Because there's this absolute trust that if we remain as we're meant to be, then everything else will work from that. I sometimes have found myself in a position where I can't see the logical progression from the only actions that are open to me. I don't see how this action is going to affect that result. I'm trying to make this result. I have no access to that result, but I will just do the best I can. I call that doing my Dharma in a vacuum. And the vacuum is that I cannot see the cause and effect relationship of my right action. But it's the only action that's available to me, and therefore I will proceed in the right way. I've been caught in situations where other people's actions, or other groups of people even, were acting in ways that I simply couldn't influence. It was beyond my control. So what part of it do I have control over? My own heart. Just exactly like that monk says, do I keep compassion? Do I become judgmental? Do I become afraid? Do I become angry? And there's a great sort of compelling push in our culture that tells us that we must. Right at the moment we're caught up in a national election in the USA. This is the end of September 2020, the most contentious, impossible election of certainly of my lifetime, and seemingly of the country, which is not a very old country, but nonetheless, just like chaos on a level that is every day, it's more, and just revelations in newspapers and threats, and here's a very stark point. A man who lives in our community right here in Palo Alto, he drove to just a couple of miles from here to take a friend to a doctor's appointment. So it was a place he'd never driven to. He saw a shop, and there was a line around the block to get into the shop because it was a small shop and there had to be social distancing. What kind of a store is that? It was a gun shop. People were lining up to buy guns. This was yesterday morning, a few miles from where we live. Who can say? So this is where that feeling of trust, really, we can't trust humanity, we can't trust the government, we can't trust the newspapers, we can't really trust any of that. I'm not saying, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not advocating some massive conspiracy, as I know some of people that I know are now advocating. I don't mean that. Everybody's simply going to be who they're going to be. And the values that move me and that move Ananda do not move most of the world. Thank God we're not alone. We're not solitary in this by any means. But there's a lot of parallel forces going on in the universe right now. And it's a very, very deep challenge to trust God. But what other project is there that's worth doing? There's all this force that says you have to be angry, you have to stand up for this, you have to show what you believe in. And I'm not averse to doing any of that. I mean, in principle, it could be necessary. And some people who share my spiritual point of view feel compelled to do that. They feel like that is their Dharma and they need to do it. But whatever one feels one's own Dharma is, it needs to emanate from a fundamental trust in God. Because if one is being motivated only by social pressure, by fad, by fear of being thought ill of, by fear in general, by judgment, by anger, by lack of compassion, if one is being motivated by any of those things, think carefully how to put yourself back into a position of Dharma, where we're really trusting that where there is Dharma, there is victory. And as long as I hold as powerfully as I am able, and believe me, it is a constant struggle, to hold my consciousness, Divine Mother, I know you are in charge, place me where I need to be, tell me what I need to do. I haven't finished the thought of being practical in our idealism. Sometimes that Dharma, how do I put this here? This is a very mixed world. And we can, the purity that is possible is in our consciousness. And to be completely pure in our actions is not always possible. Just simply isn't possible. So we have to be practical. Given the ideals that we have, what will bring me closer to it? I would love to see complete racial equality. I would love to see complete even-handed administration of all laws in this country, all authority. I would love to see generosity of heart in terms of distribution of resources. But how to get to those ideals, given the nature of this universe, where light and shadow play together? What is my Dharma in relationship to that? And it just comes back to consciousness. Take care of my consciousness and emanate the right consciousness insofar as God, whatever door God opens to me, rush through it with every bit of energy I have, and then trust that whatever comes, whether it is difficult or elegant, whether it is beautiful or unspeakably ugly, that I trust that God is in charge. Babaji and Jesus are fully aware of the dangerous developments, especially of Western civilization, with its selfishness and tendency toward violence and religious and racial bigotry. And they have planned the salvation of the age. And this is it. Self-realization, not Ananda or self-realization fellowship church, but self-realization itself. When we know ourselves as one with the infinite spirit, everything else will follow. And And our job is my job, and our job as Ananda, I believe, is to draw as close to the divine as possible within ourselves, and then do everything we can to awaken others. May thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of my devotion, and may I be able to awaken that love in all hearts. Om, peace. Amen.